All right, everybody, welcome back. What we did last time is we set up a very basic UI, and as we go through the course, we'll start to look at more complex UIs, how we can use subtle animations, stuff like that. Um, I love UI design. I also really love programming, and I hope I can sort of get that to you guys in this lesson because that's what we're going to be doing. So go ahead and open up your static dialog manager here, which is a script we created in the last lesson. Okay, so I'm going to do my best to explain all of this to you. Um, the thing with coding that scares a lot of people is the first time they do it, it's like they're learning a new language. It's too much information. They think they have to memorize everything, and that's not the case. And just like any language, like English, for example, the first time you hear the word hello, you're like, oh, okay, that's a greeting, right? But if you learn it in another language, you might forget the word if you don't use it that often. With programming, it's the same thing. Like the more you do it, the more you start to see repetition. You're like, oh, everybody says hola, or whatever the word is in many other given languages, right? And then they're like, okay, I'm going to use that as a greeting to say hello, or what's up. So I'm going to type in some code. I'm going to explain it as I go, and yeah, and again, you're going to see this over and over again. This is going to be a little bit of code that we're going to write, and that's okay. So let's start at the top. We have these things called using directives. And you can think of these as like libraries of code that we can use that are provided to us by either Unity or different third-party companies, for example, Ink or TextMesh Pro or these other companies. So I'm just going to select this and hit Control and D just to duplicate it to save time. And I want to have access to Unity's UI. Now the next thing I want to do is I'm going to hit Enter and I'm just going to start typing using here. And later what I'll do is I'll just freeze the videos, I'll type it out, and then I'll essentially, you know, um, and just explain it. So don't worry, you're not going to have to watch me type every single time. So what I want to also use is TextMesh Pro. This is the library of those cool text boxes and stuff that we created earlier, and buttons and stuff like that. We want to have access to those so that we can change the name of the buttons or script them or what have you. And the next thing is I want to get access to Ink. So I'm going to use another using directive here. And I want to use Ink, and I'm going to be using their runtime so we could see the code update in real time. All right, so inside, here's our class declaration here. And it's just, remember what I told you, it has to have the same name as our file or we're going to get errors. And so we have a class here, and it's deriving or getting information from mono behavior. Not necessarily important for you to know what that is at this point. So at the top here, this is where you declare your variables. This is your declare your variables. And you also declare variables inside these things called functions or methods, which are down here. But these are our global variables. These are variables we want to use multiple times throughout our script, so we put them up here. So let's start off by creating our first variable, which is going to store a reference to the JSON file, which is that, remember in the last lesson, let's just jump into Unity and I'll show you. Okay, so I set this up so we're looking at my Unity on the left and then our coding environment on the right. I'm going to run through the code as quick as I can because I do teach a programming course where we go into these concepts a little bit deeper, but I do love programming. I love scripting, and once you get into the habit of seeing, just you understand structures and patterns and stuff, it actually gets a lot easier than you would think. It gets formulaic. So a lot of people who struggle with coding often see it as this big foreign language and they get scared. So because we've done a lot with Twine, some of these terms are going to be a little more familiar to you. You might not fully understand them, and that's completely okay. So up at the top, we have a using directive here. These are different libraries that we want to use that have code in them. So there's a whole bunch of library. You can think of this as a library called Unity Engine. It has a bunch of code in it. These two pieces are from that code, and they have their own specific functions, which we'll get into later. What I generally do, and what most people do, is variables that I'm going to be using throughout my class. That's what this script is called. It's called the class. And what a class is just a collection of code. Is we put our variables at the top that we're going to use throughout this class. So I'm just going to make a comment by putting 2 forward slashes and just write the word variables here so you know. And I'm going to go ahead and just briefly talk about a few things. I made a empty game. I went right-clicked. I went to create empty. And I named the game object dialog manager, and then I dragged this static dialog manager script onto my dialog manager game object here just by grabbing it from my scripts folder here, dragging and dropping it on here. If you want to remove it, you can right click and go to remove component. So let's take a look at a couple things. I'm going to pause the video and I'm just going to write out my first. All right, so here's my first variable, and right off the bat we should be getting an error, and the reason for that is because this text asset here is part of another library, but it looks like it automatically read it, I guess, through here. But when I go to save this, notice this word private here. If I go into my my C# script here, notice that on the start dialog in my inspector, there's nothing here. There's nothing. We can't see anything here. But if I change this word from private to public, and I save this, what you're going to notice is the asset here is changed. It's exposed now. So now when I click on this, you can see it says the name of my variable here, inc.json, and it's able to store text assets, and I exposed it inside of my inspector here. So if we go to our story folder here, that's what this file is here. We have a let's see, let me unlock this. Inside of here we have a JSON file, right, with all of this text, and then we have an actual text asset file. This is where all of our text is stored. This right here is our inc file and has the ink on it, and that's what we can hit play and we can go through those different settings. So because this is of type text asset, if I tried to drag in, for example, my panel, you'll see I can't. It gives me this little red crossed out thing saying, hey, this doesn't fit here. But if I grab my text document and I drop it in here, it allows me to do that, because a variable can store things generally of a specific type, right? So this one can only store text assets, and the access type is called public. Generally, if you don't want other people or other things to access this outside of this class, you would mark it as private. But you're going to notice an issue here. So when I go to save this and I go back into my script here, you'll notice it disappears. And we didn't write any other code in here to get this component, because we're not really adding this as another component here. So you can see that's gone. So what you can do is you can add you can mark this as a serialized field, and now when you save it, it will somewhat behave like a public object, where it'll expose this variable inside of our component here. So if I click on this again, let it compile, you see now we have it back, and we can drag in that Maya file. Now another thing that I like to do is I like to use these things called headers, and all these do is essentially they allow us to break our sections up into different like headers for each section. So for example, like this is my inc story variable, so I might write inc story components here. So if I save that and I go inside of here, you'll see that it'll add a little header called inc story above that, and you generally want to write something like inc story asset or something here. So you can see it says inc story here. I'm going to save that again, let it compile out, and it'll say asset. It'll update. I'm going to pause the video and type out 2 more variables and 2 more headers. All right, I went ahead and we have some errors. It's these red marks here, and I'll explain those in a second. But I actually typed out 3 variables and 2 more headers. And when I saved this, you'll notice that nothing happened here. It didn't update it with this text mesh pro, remember we created that text field? This is a reference to that. It didn't show up, so we could drag that in. Our array here, and I'll get into arrays in a second, button didn't show up. And the reason for that is the code for story is part of the Unity, essentially the inc runtime. So that's the library. So using inc and then dot runtime. And you'll see that corrected this error here. So this code here, story, this data type here allows the word current story to be able to go through each line of this script. That's what this variable is allowed to do. Like, so if we use current story, we make it equal to our inc asset or whatever. This is the data type that'll store that. The other thing is with these TextMesh Pro assets, like the buttons and the dialog text, we need another using vector, because that code, this data type here, is located within a library of code. So I'm going to actually just duplicate this one more time, just because I'm being lazy and I don't want to type the word using. And I'm just going to type in tmp Pro. So capital T, MP Pro, and I'll save that. Now this button here is actually part of the Unity user interface. So I'm going to go to the top here, hit Control D to duplicate that line, and then do .UI, and there goes all of our errors. And now when I save this and I go back inside of here, you're going to see two new headers. And one header will allow us to drag in our dialog text, which is this box here that we want to reference. So let's go ahead and drag this out a little bit. We have our panel here, and I'll just name this dialog. Let's put dialog there. And then I'm going to get rid of the, well, we could leave TMP if somebody's interested. Another thing I want to do is select this again, and I'm just going to lock this so that every time I click off, it holds this in place. And then I could just drag in my dialog text box here. Now for the buttons, we have something called an array. So this looks like a normal variable name, right? So we call this choice buttons. And what do we want to store in there? We want to store a button, right? But the thing is, we want to store more than one button because we actually have 3 buttons, and we want to be able to change the names of these buttons and do things with these buttons, right? So that we can cycle through them. And that's what this comes into effect. By adding this bracket here, I'm going to go ahead and hit Control X to cut that, and I can save this. It's going to change this into a normal looking variable just like that. So let's save that. And come on, update. Now it just looks like a regular choice buttons, and we could store a single button. But like I said, I want to store a reference to all 3 buttons, so I'm going to put those 2 here, indicating that this variable is an array. And what an array is it's a, you could think of it as a cabinet versus a cup, right? We have a cup and we could store a single button in it. But if we have multiple drawers, we can store multiple types of buttons in there. But in this particular case, we're only storing one type of button. So a couple ways to do this is you can change this number here to 3. You can click plus 3 times, or you can select all 3 of these by holding Shift, and you can drag them right inside of here. And you'll see it added button 1, button 2. So now when I save this, this is now, this array button, and we'll get into cycling through it, has now got a reference to all 3 of these button objects. Our dialog text here is referencing that, and then this is referencing our file. All right, so let's go ahead and make current story equal to something. Right now, all these variables here are equal to these objects that we added, but current story isn't storing anything, and that's what we're going to use our start method for. Now in start, what happens is anything that we do in start, it runs one time at the very beginning. So let me just show you an example of this. So I'm going to type print in this method here and put a semicolon and write the word hello. Hello. And I'll go ahead and save this. And if we jump back in here and I press play, down at the bottom here, actually let's open up our console. Now your console is what you'll use a lot of times for testing your code. It gives you lots of errors if there's problems in your code, and you'll see all that stuff later. So anyway, Window, General, and then we will go to Console or Control-Shift-C, and let's drag this into this view. So when I press play now, you're going to see that whatever code is in here runs one time the second that this script is called or executed. And we have the script attached to here. So now when I go inside of here, you can see it says hello. And the difference between the start method and the update is if I hold Alt and I'm just going to click my left arrow and I'm going to make sure my code is in between these 2 brackets here. And I go to save this and I press play now back in my view. Give that a second to recompile. And I press play here. What you'll notice is it's constantly running. So see how it says update is called once per frame? Now that frame rate is variable, which means say you have a faster computer than mine, you're getting 120 frames per second, and mine is a pretty slow computer and I'm getting 30 frames per second. This update method runs every frame. And so that's good for doing things like checking health or stuff like that, or even just during the prototyping phase. Okay, so let's get back into coding this. All right, so let's take a look at what's going on here. Instead of our start method, what I did is I made current story here equal to a new story element. And what is that story element? Well, it says inc.json.text. So what this is doing is this saying, hey, we have a variable here called inc.json, and it's storing a text, it's storing text information. And so we're going to grab this file from here and we're going to store it in current story. And that gives us the power to do things like check what the current place in our story is, check if we can continue, things like that. So what I want to do here is I'm going to create a whole new method just refreshing the dialog. So I'm going to go ahead and type that out. All right, so the way that you create a method is, and we're just going to look at one type right now, but you write the access. So I want this to be accessed from outside of this class. I want to be able to call refresh dialog view. And you just create it. So this is creating the method itself. So this is the basic structure. You have an open curly brace, closed curly brace, and then any code you put inside of here. For example, let's say we want to add a print statement here, and I'm going to print, let's see, hello from refresh. All right, so now we've created a method, and all this method does, or this little machine does, is it prints this word to the screen. It doesn't do anything else yet. Now there's two parts to a method. We have to create it, and then we have to call it. Okay, I'm going to show you what it looks like when you don't call it. So back in here, let's make sure that I might dock my console one more time. I think I closed it. Let's see, general, console, there it is. And I'm going to dock it across the whole bottom of my screen here. So now when I press play, you'll notice we're not getting that hello message anymore because we deleted it. And we're not getting this print hello from refresh here. We're getting nothing here. We're not getting anything here. So this method is something we created, right? And let's go ahead and take our update method here, for example. Oh, we'll leave the story. Yeah, we'll leave it start up here. So how do we call this? Well, all we do is we take the name of it with those parentheses. We paste it somewhere that we want to call it. So what I want to do is right off the bat, I want to set my story to this document. And then I'm going to call this refresh dialog view right in start. So I'm going to save that. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to press play here. And through the magic of television, you can see hello from refresh. All right, so I think because we are at 13 minutes here, I think we did a good job. We talked a little bit about variables. We talked a little bit about how to create a function and then call that function. What I'm going to do is stop here, and then what we'll do is we'll get into using an if statement to, what we'll do is we'll go through the whole refresh dialog view. We'll fill out this function in the next lesson because we're getting kind of long here. And yeah, I think that's it.